Fart on the kitchen worker tonight? Grace overheard her billionaire boss say, Fart on was secret code for you. No, what? 24-year-old Grace Adebayo was making dinner when she heard tech mogul Diana Okafor speaking on the phone upstairs. But this wasn't a normal business call. Diana was finalizing plans to murder Grace before midnight because Grace had seen too much. For 8 months, Grace cleaned the Lagos mansion, served meals, and stayed invisible. She never asked about the locked basement rooms, never questioned the documents Diana burned every night, never wondered why dangerous men visited at 3 a.m. But invisibility has its advantages. Grace saw everything, heard everything, and when she accidentally discovered Diana's $200 million human trafficking empire, she became the one witness who could destroy it all. What happens next will shock you. The kitchen worker, who was supposed to die quietly instead, triggered the biggest takedown in Nigeria's history. You'll see how Grace outsmarted armed assassins using nothing but her knowledge of the mansion's layout. Watch her turn from hunted prey into the hunter, gathering evidence that would expose government corruption reaching the president's inner circle. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. 3 years later, Grace receives a message from Diana herself. I want to help you destroy my replacements. The woman who tried to murder Grace now needs her to survive? This isn't just a survival story. It's about a kitchen worker who brought down a billionaire, exposed a government conspiracy, and ultimately partnered with her attempted killer to save 2,000 trafficking victims. Stay until the end to discover how Grace transformed Diana's blood money into Africa's most powerful anti-trafficking foundation, and why sometimes your worst enemy becomes your greatest ally in the fight for justice. Chapter 1. The Gilded Prison. The marble floors of the Okafor mansion gleamed like black mirrors in the pre-dawn darkness, reflecting the soft glow of crystal chandeliers that never fully dimmed. Grace Adebayo moved through the silence like a shadow, her bare feet making no sound as she began her daily ritual of bringing the house to life. 5 a.m. was her hour. The hour when Lagos still slept, when the traffic had not yet begun its daily roar, when the mansion belonged only to her and the weight of her own thoughts. She moved with practiced efficiency through rooms that cost more than her village would see in a lifetime, dusting surfaces that already gleamed, arranging flowers that would wilt and be replaced tomorrow, ensuring that every detail met the exacting standards of Diana Okafor. Mrs. Diana Okafor. Even thinking the name made Grace straighten her shoulders with a mixture of pride and fear. At 38, Diana was one of Nigeria's most powerful tech entrepreneurs, her company controlling telecommunications networks across West Africa. She was brilliant, ruthless, and beautiful in the way that money could perfect. All sharp angles and expensive treatments that made her look carved from precious stone. Grace had been working in the mansion for 8 months now, ever since her last employer had downsized and could no longer afford domestic help. The job at the Okafor estate had felt like winning the lottery. The pay was triple what she'd earned before, enough to send substantial money home to her mother in Kaduna and still save for the nursing school fees she dreamed of one day affording. But lottery winnings, Grace had learned, often came with hidden costs. The mansion was a testament to Diana's success. 23 rooms spread across 3 floors with gardens that required a team of 6 to maintain, and technology that seemed to anticipate needs before they arose. Everything was controlled by voice commands, tablets embedded in walls, and sensors that tracked movement through every room. Grace sometimes felt like she was living inside a computer, constantly watched and analyzed by invisible eyes. Diana herself was an enigma wrapped in designer clothing. She could be gracious one moment, praising Grace's attention to detail or asking about her family with what seemed like genuine interest. But Grace had also witnessed the phone conversations that took place behind closed doors, the voices that emerged from Diana's study sharp with threats and calculations that made Grace's skin crawl. There were the late-night meetings with men in expensive suits who spoke in whispers and left through side doors. There were the documents that Diana burned in the fireplace after reading, the ashes of which Grace was instructed to collect and dispose of in different locations around the city. There were the rooms in the basement that remained locked, their purposes unknown but somehow ominous in their secrecy. Grace told herself it wasn't her business. She was hired to clean, to cook, to maintain the smooth operation of a household. What Diana did to earn the money that paid Grace's salary was between Diana and God. Grace had learned young that survival often meant seeing only what you were supposed to see, hearing only what was meant for your ears. But some secrets refused to stay hidden. On this particular morning, as Grace arranged fresh lilies in the dining room vase, she heard the distinctive click of Diana's high heels on the stairs above. Diana never woke this early unless something was wrong. Grace paused, her hands still among the flowers, listening to the pattern of movement above her head. Diana's footsteps moved from the master bedroom to the office, where the sound of a heavy safe opening echoed through the mansion's perfect acoustics. Then silence. Then the unmistakable sound of papers being shuffled, of something important being retrieved. Grace continued her work, but a small knot of unease had formed in her stomach. In 8 months of employment, she had learned to read the rhythms of Diana's moods like a sailor reads weather patterns. And this morning felt like a storm was approaching. The footsteps returned, moving down the hallway toward the main staircase. Grace quickly finished with the flowers and moved toward the kitchen, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping, even if she hadn't meant to listen. But as she reached the kitchen door, Diana's voice drifted down from the landing above, speaking in rapid Igbo to someone on the phone. Grace's Igbo was limited, learned during her childhood in a mixed community, but she caught enough words to make her freeze. Problem. Tonight. Permanent solution. Permanent. Her hands trembled as she pushed through the kitchen door, telling herself she had misunderstood, that her limited grasp of the language had led her to imagine threats where none existed. But as she began preparing Diana's morning coffee, Ethiopian beans ground fresh, served in the Hermes china cup that cost more than Grace's monthly salary, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in the house overnight. The kitchen was Grace's domain, the only room in the mansion where she felt truly comfortable. Here, surrounded by copper pots and marble countertops, she could lose herself in the familiar rhythms of cooking and preparation. The kitchen connected to a small pantry where Grace often ate her own meals, a cozy space filled with imported ingredients and the lingering scents of spices from around the world. As she waited for the coffee to brew, Grace heard Diana's heels clicking down the main staircase. The sound was different this morning, more purposeful, more urgent. Grace quickly arranged the coffee service on a silver tray, adding the morning newspapers Diana always read while eating breakfast. "Grace," Diana's voice carried from the dining room, musical but with an edge that made Grace's pulse quicken. "Yes, ma'am," Grace called back, lifting the tray with steady hands despite the tremor she felt in her chest. When Grace entered the dining room, Diana was seated at the head of the massive mahogany table, still in her silk pajamas but somehow looking more put together than most people did in formal wear. Her laptop was open beside her plate, and Grace could see the glow of multiple screens reflecting in Diana's dark eyes. "Thank you," Diana said as Grace set down the coffee, her voice distracted. "Grace, I'll be having some business associates over this evening. They'll be arriving around 8, and they'll be using the study for important discussions. I need you to ensure we're not disturbed." "Of course, ma'am," Grace replied, though something in Diana's tone made the simple request sound more like a warning. "I mean it, Grace," Diana continued, looking up from her laptop with an intensity that made Grace take a step back. "These are very private meetings, very sensitive business. I need you to stay in the kitchen or your room after 7:30. Don't come upstairs for any reason. Don't answer the door, don't answer the phone. Is that clear?" Grace nodded, though confusion swirled in her mind. Diana had hosted business meetings before, but she had never given such specific instructions about avoiding the house. If anything, Grace was usually asked to serve refreshments and ensure the guests' comfort. "Yes, ma'am, very clear." Diana's smile was sharp as a blade. "Good. You're such a treasure, Grace. I don't know what I would do without you." The words should have been a compliment, but they felt like a threat. Grace retreated to the kitchen, her mind racing with questions she didn't dare voice. As she began preparing Diana's breakfast, steel-cut oats with imported honey, fresh berries arranged with the precision of a museum display, she tried to convince herself that her imagination was creating danger where none existed. But when Diana's phone rang and she answered in that same urgent Igbo, Grace found herself straining to listen despite her better judgment. This time she caught more words. Witness, liability, clean up. Grace's hand stilled on the berry arrangement. In any other context, those words might have innocent explanations, but combined with Diana's strange behavior and the secretive nature of tonight's meeting, they formed a pattern that made Grace's mouth go dry with fear. Chapter 2. Secrets in the Shadows. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness, each hour bringing Grace closer to the mysterious evening meeting that filled her with dread. Diana left for her office at 10, as usual, but not before giving Grace another pointed reminder about staying out of sight after 7:30. "I cannot stress enough how important tonight's privacy is," Diana had said, her hand resting on Grace's shoulder with what felt more like a threat than reassurance. "Some business discussions require absolute discretion." Grace spent the afternoon cleaning rooms that were already spotless, her mind churning through possibilities. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe the fragments of conversation she'd overheard were about legitimate business problems. Maybe her imagination, shaped by too many Nollywood films about corrupt politicians and dangerous business people, was creating drama where none existed. But as evening approached and Grace began preparing what Diana had requested as a simple dinner for one, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was arranging her own last meal. At 7:15, the electronic gates opened with their familiar mechanical hum, followed by the sound of multiple vehicles moving up the circular driveway. Grace positioned herself at the kitchen window, peering through the curtains to see three black SUVs parking near the main entrance. The men who emerged from the vehicles were not the usual business associates who visited Diana. These men moved like predators, their eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, their expensive suits unable to completely hide the bulges that suggested concealed weapons. They spoke to each other in low voices, and even from a distance, Grace could see that they carried themselves with the casual menace of people accustomed to violence. Grace's blood turned to ice as she watched Diana greet these men with the easy familiarity of long association. Whatever business Diana conducted with these people, it was not her first time dealing with them. As the group moved inside, Grace retreated deeper into the kitchen, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She busied herself with unnecessary cleaning, trying to calm her nerves with familiar motions. She was just a domestic worker. Whatever business Diana conducted with her associates had nothing to do with Grace. She would stay in the kitchen as instructed, mind her own business, and in the morning, everything would return to normal. But as voices drifted down from Diana's study, voices that grew increasingly agitated, punctuated by sharp laughter and what sounded like arguments, Grace found it impossible to ignore the growing certainty that normal had already become a luxury she could no longer afford. The mansion's architecture, designed to showcase Diana's wealth rather than provide privacy, carried sound with crystal clarity through its open spaces and high ceilings. Grace found herself catching fragments of conversation in multiple languages: English, Igbo, what sounded like Hausa, and something else she couldn't identify. She tried to focus on organizing spice containers that were already perfectly arranged, but her hands shook as she moved jars of saffron and cardamom. Every instinct she had developed during a childhood spent navigating dangerous adults told her that something terrible was being planned upstairs. At 9:30, one of the men's voices rose above the others, speaking in accented English. "The girl has been here 8 months. She cleans every room, handles your personal papers. She sees everything." Grace's heart stopped. She pressed herself against the kitchen wall, straining to hear Diana's response. "Grace is not a problem." Diana's voice carried clearly down the stairs, ice cold despite its musical tone. "She's grateful for the job. She keeps her mouth shut and does what she's told." "Grateful employees can become ungrateful witnesses," another man replied, "especially when the money is right. How much do you think your competitors would pay for information about your side businesses?" Grace's legs nearly gave out as the implication hit her. They weren't just talking about her, they were talking about her as a liability to be managed. "Grace doesn't know anything," Diana insisted, but there was less conviction in her voice now. "She cleans and cooks. She doesn't speak the languages we use for sensitive conversations. She's from some village in Kaduna. She's never been exposed to this level of business." "Village girls aren't stupid," the first man said, "and they talk. To family, to friends, to anyone who'll listen. How long before she mentions the late-night meetings to the wrong person? How long before she starts asking questions about the locked rooms?" Grace bit her hand to keep from gasping. She had wondered about those locked rooms in the basement, had even tried the handles once or twice when Diana was away, but she had assumed they contained storage or perhaps Diana's personal collection of art or wine. "She's seen the documents you burn," another voice added. "She's collected the ashes. She's handled your correspondence. Even if she can't read everything, she's been exposed to too much." "What are you suggesting?" Diana's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "You know what we're suggesting," the first man replied. "Clean up the loose ends, tonight, before she has a chance to become a bigger problem." "No." The silence that followed was more terrifying than any of the words that had come before. Grace stood frozen against the wall, her mind racing through impossible calculations. Could she make it to her room without being heard? Could she slip out through the service entrance? Could she trust that Diana would protect her employee against these men's suggestions? Then Diana spoke, and Grace's world collapsed around her. "You're right," Diana said, her voice now carrying the same cold efficiency Grace had heard her use during business calls. "Grace has been useful, but usefulness has an expiration date. How do you recommend we handle it?" "Make it look natural," one of the men replied. "Accident in the kitchen, gas leak maybe, or she falls down the stairs while cleaning late at night. Domestic workers die in accidents all the time. No one investigates too closely." Grace's vision blurred as the full horror of the situation crashed over her. These people she had served meals to, whose clothes she had cleaned, whose home she had maintained with pride and dedication, were casually discussing her murder as if it were a routine business decision. "Tonight?" Diana asked. "Tonight," the man confirmed. "After we finish our business here. Make it quick and clean. Tomorrow morning, you discover the tragic accident and call the authorities. You're devastated by the loss of such a faithful employee." The story writes itself. Grace heard the scrape of chairs being pushed back, the sound of footsteps moving around the study. The meeting was ending, which meant she had perhaps an hour before they would come looking for her. But more than escape, Grace realized she needed evidence. If she simply ran, Diana would claim she had stolen something or threatened her employer. Diana had connections throughout Lagos, influence that could make Grace disappear even if she made it off the property. Grace would spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, waiting for Diana's reach to find her. Moving as quietly as she could, Grace slipped into the pantry adjacent to the kitchen. Diana's tablet often sat on the kitchen counter when she worked from home, and Grace remembered seeing her use a voice recording app during business calls. If Grace could access that tablet and find evidence of Diana's illegal activities, she might have a chance at justice instead of just survival. Grace's hands shook as she spotted the tablet on the counter, its screen dark but still connected to the mansion's Wi-Fi network. She activated it and began scrolling through Diana's files, her breath catching as she discovered the true scope of her employer's business empire. Diana's telecommunications company was a front for something much darker. The files contained shipping manifests, financial records, and communications that detailed a vast network of illegal activities. Human trafficking, money laundering, government corruption reaching the highest levels of Nigerian leadership. The locked rooms in the basement weren't storage, they were temporary holding facilities for people being moved through illegal networks. Grace's hands moved frantically as she copied the most damaging files to cloud storage accounts, using her nursing school application login and creating backup accounts under false names. She photographed documents with the tablet's camera, her mind reeling at the scope of the criminal enterprise she had unknowingly been working within. But as she worked, voices began moving down the stairs from the study. The meeting was ending earlier than expected. "The girl should be in the kitchen now," she heard one of the men saying. "Let's get this done." Grace quickly returned the tablet to its original position and slipped back into the pantry, pressing herself against the wall as footsteps approached the kitchen. Through the crack in the pantry door, she could see Diana enter with two of the men, their faces grim with purpose. "Grace?" Diana called, her voice carrying that same false sweetness that now made Grace's skin crawl. "Where are you, dear? I have something for you." Grace held her breath as Diana moved through the kitchen, opening cabinet doors and checking corners. The pantry door remained closed, but Grace knew it was only a matter of time before they searched everywhere. "Maybe she's already in her room," one of the men suggested. "Check the servants' quarters," Diana ordered. "She's probably reading one of those nursing textbooks she's always studying. So ambitious, our Grace. Such a shame that ambition will never be fulfilled." The casual cruelty in Diana's voice made Grace's stomach turn. This woman had encouraged her dreams, had praised her intelligence, had seemed genuinely interested in Grace's plans for the future. It had all been an act, a performance designed to keep a useful employee content and unsuspecting. As footsteps moved toward the back stairs that led to the servants' quarters, Grace realized this was her only chance. The men were splitting up to search the house, leaving Diana alone in the kitchen. If Grace could slip out through the service door while they were distracted, she might be able to escape before they realized she was gone. But as Grace reached for the pantry door handle, she heard Diana speaking into her phone. "Lock down the property. Electronic gates, service entrances, everything. The girl may have overheard something. We can't let her leave the grounds." Grace's heart sank as she heard the electronic locks engaging throughout the house. She was trapped in a mansion that had become her prison, surrounded by people who had already decided she needed to die. But Grace had something they didn't know about: evidence of their crimes uploading to the cloud, information that would survive even if she didn't. And if she was going to die tonight, she was determined to take Diana's empire down with her. Chapter 3. The Hunt Begins. Grace remained hidden in the pantry as Diana's associates methodically searched the house, their footsteps echoing through rooms that had once felt like a sanctuary. The service door was locked electronically, the windows were fitted with alarms, and the property walls were topped with razor wire. Diana had turned the mansion into a fortress designed to keep people out, but tonight it was keeping Grace in. Through the crack in the pantry door, Grace watched Diana pace the kitchen with predatory patience. The woman who had once seemed like a benevolent employer now moved with the calculated precision of someone accustomed to eliminating problems. "Check the basement," Diana called to her men. "All the rooms, including the locked ones. She may have found a way down there." Grace's blood chilled as she realized Diana was worried about more than just her escape. The locked rooms contained evidence of crimes that would destroy far more than just Diana's business. They would expose a network of corruption reaching into the highest levels of government. The tablet she had used to photograph Diana's files sat on the kitchen counter, innocuous but containing the digital fingerprints of her desperate attempt to gather evidence. Grace needed to retrieve it and ensure the evidence reached people who could act on it. As Diana moved toward the kitchen island to pour herself a glass of wine, a casual gesture that made the night's deadly purpose even more surreal, Grace saw her opportunity. Diana's back was turned, and the tablet was within reach if Grace could slip out of the pantry without being detected. Grace eased the pantry door open and darted toward the counter, her bare feet silent on the marble floor. Her fingers closed around the tablet just as Diana turned, wine glass in hand. For a heartbeat, the two women stared at each other across the kitchen that had been Grace's workplace for 8 months. Diana's eyes took in Grace's terrified expression, the tablet clutched in her hands, and the understanding that her trusted employee now knew exactly what was planned for her. "Well," Diana said, setting down her wine glass with deliberate calm, "this changes things." Grace backed toward the service door, though she knew it was locked. "I don't know what you think I heard, but—" "You heard everything," Diana interrupted, her voice carrying a note of genuine regret. "I can see it in your eyes. You know about the business, about tonight's plans. You've been through my files." Her gaze shifted to the tablet in Grace's hands. "How much did you copy?" Grace's mind raced through lies and denials, but Diana's expression told her that deception was pointless. "Enough," Grace said quietly. Diana's laugh was soft and genuinely amused. "You know, Grace, I actually liked you. You were efficient, discreet, and you never asked questions about things that weren't your business. I was hoping we could handle this quietly, make it look like an accident. You would have died thinking you were just an unlucky victim of circumstance. But now you know you're dying because you're a threat," Diana continued, moving closer with the fluid grace of a predator. "That's so much harder, isn't it? Dying when you understand exactly why it's happening?" Grace heard footsteps on the stairs as Diana's associates returned from their search. In moments, the kitchen would be full of armed men, and her chances of escape would disappear entirely. "The files are already uploaded," Grace said, desperate to buy time. "Multiple cloud accounts. If anything happens to me, they'll be released automatically." Diana's expression didn't change. "No, they won't. You're not sophisticated enough to set up that kind of dead man's switch. You're a village girl who learned to use basic technology, not a cybersecurity expert. You copied files in a panic and uploaded them to your nursing school account, maybe your personal email, accounts we can access and delete within hours." Grace's heart sank as she realized Diana was probably right. Her desperate attempt to preserve evidence had been amateur and easily traced. "But even if you did manage some elaborate backup system," Diana continued, "do you really think it would matter? Half the government officials in those files work for me. The police commissioners, the judges, the prosecutors, they're all part of the network you discovered. Your evidence would disappear into bureaucratic black holes, and anyone who tried to act on it would find their careers suddenly ended." The kitchen door opened and Diana's associates entered, their search of the house complete. The lead man, tall, scarred, with the cold eyes of someone who had killed before, looked between Diana and Grace with professional assessment. "Found her," he said unnecessarily. "She knows everything," Diana replied. "She's been through the files, copied data. We need to retrieve whatever she uploaded and then handle the situation." Grace clutched the tablet tighter, though she knew it was useless as a weapon or shield. "People will ask questions if I disappear, My mother expects money from me every month. My nursing school will wonder why I don't show up for the entrance exam. Your mother will receive a letter explaining that you found a better job in Europe. Diana said matter-of-factly. Domestic workers emigrate all the time, chasing higher wages. She'll be sad but not suspicious. As for nursing school, well, village girls drop out of educational programs constantly. Financial pressures, family obligations, simple lack of follow-through. No one will find it remarkable. The casual thoroughness of Diana's planning was more terrifying than any threat. These people had killed before, many times, and they had refined the process of making people disappear without raising suspicions. Let's get this done, the scarred man said, reaching inside his jacket. The longer we delay, the more complicated this becomes. But as his hand emerged holding a syringe filled with clear liquid, Grace made a desperate decision. Instead of trying to escape or fight, she did something none of them expected. She activated the tablet's emergency alert system, triggering a direct connection to Lagos Emergency Services. This is Grace Adebayo at the Okafor Mansion in Ikoyi, she said quickly into the tablet's microphone before anyone could stop her. Armed men are holding me hostage. Diana Okafor is planning to murder me. I have evidence of human trafficking and government corruption. Please send help immediately. The scarred man lunged forward to grab the tablet, but Grace hurled it through the kitchen window, its screen shattering as it hit the driveway outside. The emergency alert would continue transmitting from the device's GPS location for several minutes, even with a broken screen. You stupid girl, Diana hissed, her composed demeanor finally cracking. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Grace did know. She had guaranteed that her death would be investigated, that questions would be asked, that Diana's carefully constructed world of plausible deniability would come crashing down. She might still die tonight, but Diana's empire would die with her. Get her, Diana ordered her men. We need to leave, now. But as the scarred man reached for Grace, the sound of sirens began wailing in the distance, growing louder as they approached the mansion. Grace's emergency alert had worked. Help was coming. They can't get through the gates, one of Diana's men pointed out. Electronic locks, reinforced steel. We have time to clean this up and leave through the back. No, Diana said, her voice sharp with the realization that her perfect plan had become a catastrophe. Police response times in this neighborhood are too fast. They'll have helicopters, tactical units. We need to go now, while we still can. She turned to Grace with murder in her eyes. You have no idea how many people you've just condemned to death. The network you've exposed reaches across 3 countries. Do you think shutting down my operation will stop anything? Do you think other people won't step in to fill the void? Maybe not, Grace replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. But at least they'll have to work around the evidence I've gathered. At least some of the people you've hurt will get justice. Diana's laugh was bitter as glass. Justice? You think this is about justice? You've just started a war, Grace. And wars have casualties you can't even imagine. The sirens were getting closer, and Grace could see flashing lights reflecting off the mansion's windows. Diana's men were already moving toward the back exits, preparing for an escape that had been planned, but hoped never to be necessary. Kill her, Diana ordered as she followed her men toward the door. Make it quick. But as the scarred man raised his weapon, the mansion's front gates exploded inward under the impact of a police battering ram. Tactical officers poured onto the property, their voices shouting commands over megaphones. Grace dove behind the kitchen island as gunfire erupted throughout the mansion. Diana's men were not going quietly, and the home that had been Grace's workplace became a battlefield in the span of seconds. Through the chaos of shouting and gunfire, Grace heard Diana's voice one last time, speaking into a phone as she fled. Burn everything, all the safe houses, all the records, all the witnesses. If I go down, everyone goes down. Chapter 4. Race Against Dawn. The gunfight lasted only minutes, but it left the mansion transformed into a war zone. Grace emerged from behind the kitchen island to find tactical officers securing the area, their movements precise and professional as they checked for remaining threats. The scarred man lay motionless near the kitchen door, his weapon several feet away from his outstretched hand. One of Diana's other associates was being treated by paramedics for a gunshot wound to the shoulder, while the third was nowhere to be seen. Are you Grace Adebayo? A police commander asked, his voice gentle despite the tactical gear that made him look like a soldier. Grace nodded, still trembling from the adrenaline and shock of survival. Yes, sir. Diana Okafor and some of her men escaped. She's going to destroy evidence, eliminate witnesses. She said everyone goes down if she does. The commander's expression darkened. We need you to tell us everything you know, quickly. If she's cleaning house, people are going to die tonight. Grace found herself in the back of an armored police vehicle, racing through Lagos streets as she explained everything she had discovered about Diana's criminal network. The files she had uploaded, the locked rooms in the basement, the government officials whose names appeared in Diana's correspondence. She held back nothing. The basement, the commander said into his radio. We need teams at the Okafor mansion immediately. Possible hostages in the lower level. But as they spoke, Grace's phone, retrieved from her room during the raid, began receiving a series of text messages that made her blood run cold. The first was from an unknown number. Grace Adebayo, you have made a mistake that will cost many lives? Check the news. Grace opened her news app with shaking fingers and found the headlines that Diana had promised. Tragic fire kills 23 at Lagos shelter. Gas explosion destroys apartment building in Ikeja. Boat accident claims 15 lives on Lagos Lagoon. The locations meant nothing to Grace, but the pattern was clear. Diana was making good on her threat to eliminate witnesses and destroy evidence, regardless of how many innocent people died in the process. She's killing everyone, Grace whispered, showing the commander her phone. All these accidents, they're not accidents. The commander's face went grim as he read the headlines. She's had this contingency plan in place for years. We're not just dealing with one criminal, we're dealing with the collapse of an entire network. Another text message appeared on Grace's phone. You wanted justice. Look around you. This is what justice costs. But as the night progressed and police teams followed the leads Grace had provided, a different picture began to emerge. Yes, Diana was destroying evidence and eliminating witnesses, but she was also inadvertently exposing the full scope of her network to law enforcement agencies that had been hunting for exactly this kind of breakthrough. The locked rooms in the mansion's basement contained not just evidence of Diana's crimes, but detailed records of her associates' activities across West Africa. Names, locations, financial accounts, and operational procedures that would have taken investigators years to uncover were laid out in meticulous detail. She kept records of everything, the commander explained to Grace as dawn approached. Probably as insurance against her partners betraying her. But now those records are going to bring down the entire organization. Grace watched the sunrise from the window of a safe house where police had brought her for protection. The events of the night felt surreal, like a nightmare she might wake up from at any moment. But the bandages on her feet from running through the mansion barefoot, the cut on her arm from diving behind the kitchen island, and the constant presence of armed guards reminded her that it had all been terrifyingly real. What happens now? She asked the detective assigned to protect her. Now we hunt, the detective replied. Diana Okafor has probably left the country, but her network is still operating. With the evidence you gathered, we can roll up operations across 3 countries, free hundreds of trafficking victims, and arrest government officials who thought they were untouchable. And Diana? Diana will spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, just like she planned for you to do. But unlike you, she'll be running from people with resources, connections, and a very long reach. Grace's phone buzzed with one final message from Diana. You saved your own life, but you destroyed hundreds of others. I hope you can live with that. Grace deleted the message without responding. Diana was wrong. Grace hadn't destroyed lives. She had revealed the truth about lives that were already being destroyed by people who thought their wealth and power made them immune to consequences. Chapter 5. The Reckoning. 3 months later, Grace sat in a courtroom in Abuja, watching as the last of Diana's government collaborators was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The man, a former telecommunications minister who had facilitated Diana's illegal operations, showed no remorse as he was led away in shackles. The trials had been swift and decisive, thanks to the overwhelming evidence Grace had gathered in her desperate midnight search of Diana's files. 17 government officials, 23 corporate executives, and 47 direct employees of Diana's network had been arrested across Nigeria, Ghana, and Burkina Faso. But Diana herself remained a ghost, vanishing into a world of false identities and offshore accounts that authorities were still working to trace. Some intelligence reports placed her in South America, others in Eastern Europe. Most likely she was moving constantly, never staying in one place long enough to be tracked. The defendant's organization was responsible for the trafficking of over 2,000 people across West Africa, the judge announced during the final sentencing. The economic damage from their telecommunications fraud exceeds $500 million. The corruption of government officials undermined the rule of law itself. Grace listened to the litany of crimes with a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Justice was being served, But the human cost of Diana's network would take years to fully understand. Families had been destroyed, communities had been destabilized, and trust in institutions had been shattered. After the trial, Grace was approached by Inspector General Adebayo, no relation despite the shared surname, who had overseen the investigation. "The government wants to offer you a position," he said. "Financial crimes investigation. Your instincts for uncovering hidden information are remarkable, and we need people who understand how these networks operate." Grace considered the offer carefully. The work would be dangerous, requiring her to investigate people who had no qualms about eliminating threats. But it would also allow her to continue the fight she had started in Diana's kitchen that terrifying night. "I need to finish nursing school first," Grace replied. "That was always my dream, and I won't let Diana take that away from me, too." The Inspector General smiled. "The position will wait. We'll even provide educational support, full scholarship, plus a stipend while you study. When you graduate, you'll have the medical knowledge to understand trafficking operations from the healthcare angle. It's a perspective we've been missing." Grace felt tears forming in her eyes. The woman who had tried to destroy her life had inadvertently opened doors to opportunities Grace had never imagined possible. Chapter 6. New Beginnings. 2 years later, Grace walked across the stage at the University of Lagos to receive her nursing degree, graduating summa cum laude. In the audience, her mother had traveled from Kaduna for the first time in her life to witness her daughter's triumph. But Grace's graduation was different from her classmates in one crucial way. She was accompanied by a discreet security detail that would remain with her for years to come. Diana Okafor was still at large, and intelligence agencies believed she continued to monitor the woman who had destroyed her empire. Grace's first assignment with the Financial Crimes Commission took her to a medical clinic in Kano, where she posed as a traveling nurse while investigating suspicious patient transfers. The clinic was a front for human trafficking, using fake medical emergencies to move people across borders without proper documentation. "Trust your instincts," her supervisor had told her before the assignment. "You've already proven you can spot danger that others miss. In this work, that ability will save lives." The assignment lasted 3 months and resulted in the rescue of 47 trafficking victims and the arrest of 12 conspirators. Grace's medical training allowed her to provide immediate care to victims who had been drugged and abused, while her investigative instincts helped uncover the full scope of the operation. But it was during this assignment that Grace received the message she had been expecting for 2 years. Her secure phone buzzed with a text from an unknown international number. "Still alive, Grace? Still think you did the right thing? Check tomorrow's news from Port Harcourt." Grace immediately contacted her handlers, who put trace protocols in motion while she watched the news with growing dread. The next morning brought headlines that made her stomach turn. Medical charity. Explosion kills 34 in Port Harcourt. Investigation reveals fraud at Children's Hospital. The charity that had been destroyed was one that provided free medical care to trafficking victims, services that had been established as a direct result of Grace's testimony about Diana's network. Diana was striking back, not just at Grace, but at the people her exposure had helped. "She's trying to provoke you," Grace's handler explained. "She wants you to feel responsible for these deaths, to break your resolve." Classic psychological warfare. But Grace had learned something important during her nursing training. Healing required the courage to cut away infected tissue, even when it caused pain. Diana's network had been a cancer in Nigerian society, and removing it would inevitably cause secondary damage. "I won't let her guilt manipulate me into silence," Grace declared. "Every life she takes now proves why we needed to stop her then." Chapter 7. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. Grace's reputation as an investigator grew over the following years, as she dismantled 3 major trafficking networks and exposed corruption in industries ranging from agriculture to banking. Her unique combination of medical knowledge and investigative instincts made her particularly effective at understanding how criminal organizations exploited vulnerable populations. But with each success, Diana's revenge became more personal and more devastating. Grace's childhood friend Sarah was killed in a random car accident in Kaduna. Grace's former nursing school professor died in a medical emergency that left no traces but displayed symptoms consistent with exotic poisoning. A local police officer who had helped with Grace's first investigation was found dead in his home, officially ruled a suicide despite evidence suggesting otherwise. "She's picking off everyone connected to you," Inspector General Adebayo warned during a secure briefing. We need to consider putting you in protective custody, perhaps even relocating you outside Nigeria. Running won't stop her, Grace replied. She'll just expand her target list to include anyone who helped me run. The only way this ends is if we catch her. Grace's opportunity came through an unexpected source, a message from someone claiming to be Diana's former associate who wanted to defect. She's getting careless, the message read. Paranoid. She's eliminated so many people that her remaining network is fracturing. Meet me in Geneva and I'll give you her location. The meeting was obviously a trap, but it was also the first solid lead on Diana's whereabouts in 3 years. Grace volunteered to go, despite the extreme danger. She expects me to be afraid, Grace told her team as they planned the operation. She expects me to send someone else to hide behind agents and bodyguards. But if I show up personally, it might catch her off guard. The Geneva meeting took place in a luxury hotel overlooking Lake Geneva, with Swiss police and Interpol agents providing invisible backup. Grace sat in the hotel bar, nursing a coffee and watching every face that entered when a woman approached her table. It wasn't Diana's former associate, it was Diana herself. The woman who had once been Grace's employer looked like she had aged a decade in 3 years. Her designer clothes couldn't hide the paranoid tension in her posture, and her eyes held the haunted look of someone who never stopped watching for threats. "Hello, Grace," Diana said, sliding into the seat across from her. "You look well. Nursing school agreed with you." Grace's hand moved slowly toward the panic button that would summon her backup, but Diana shook her head. "I'm not here to hurt you," Diana said. "If I wanted you dead, you would have been dead years ago. I'm here to make you an offer." "I'm not interested in anything you're selling." "You should be," Diana replied, leaning forward with the intensity Grace remembered from their old conversations. "Because what I'm offering is the location of 17 active trafficking operations across 4 countries. Operations run by the people who replaced my network after you destroyed it." Grace studied Diana's face, looking for deception. "Why would you give me that information?" "Because the people who took over my business are animals," Diana said, her voice carrying genuine disgust. "I ran a criminal enterprise, yes, but I had rules. No children under 16, no unnecessary violence, medical care for the workers, the new operators, they have no such constraints." Diana pulled out a tablet and showed Grace photographs that made her stomach turn. "This is what your justice created, Grace. When you destroyed my network, you created a power vacuum that was filled by people far worse than I ever was. So you want me to clean up your competition?" "I want you to do what you've always done," Diana replied. "I want you to save people. The difference is that this time I'm going to help you do it." Grace stared at the woman who had tried to murder her, who had spent 3 years terrorizing everyone Grace cared about, who was now offering to help her fight even greater evils. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Diana said. "Well, one small condition. After you shut down these operations and save the people being held by them, you let me disappear. Permanently. No more hunting, no more revenge, no more chess games between us. I vanish, and you never hear from me again." "You've killed dozens of innocent people trying to hurt me. Why should I make any deal with you?" Diana's expression showed something Grace had never seen before. Genuine remorse. "Because I'm tired, Grace. Tired of running, tired of killing, tired of being the monster in everyone's story. I can't undo what I've done, but I can help you prevent worse things from happening." Grace considered the offer while her backup teams waited for her signal. Every instinct told her this was another trap, another manipulation in Diana's endless game of psychological warfare. But the photographs Diana had shown her were real. The intelligence about active trafficking operations was detailed and specific. And Grace's own investigations had confirmed that the networks that had replaced Diana's organization were indeed more brutal and less controlled. "If I agree to this," Grace said carefully, "how do I know you won't disappear and start another network somewhere else?" "Because I'm done with this business," Diana replied. "I have enough money hidden away to live comfortably for several lifetimes. What I don't have is peace. This deal gives me a chance to balance the scales, at least partially." Grace made her decision. "I'll need verification of the intelligence, independent confirmation of the locations and operations, and I'll need your cooperation during the raids, real-time intelligence, not just static information." "Agreed. And after it's over, you don't just disappear. You surrender to international authorities and testify against every remaining member of your original network." Diana's composure cracked slightly. "That wasn't part of the deal." "It is now," Grace said firmly. "You want redemption? You want to balance the scales? Then you do it properly. You face justice for what you've done, and you help ensure that no one else can pick up where you left off. Diana sat in silence for a long moment, staring out at the lake where tourist boats moved peacefully across the water. Finally, she nodded. Very well, but I have one condition of my own. What? You personally guarantee my protection while I'm testifying. These people will try to kill me the moment they learn I'm cooperating. I need someone I trust to keep me alive long enough to fulfill my part of the bargain. Grace almost laughed at the irony. You trust me? You're the only person who's ever beaten me, Diana replied. That makes you the only person capable of protecting me from people like me. Vapor. Chapter 8. Unlikely Allies. The operation that followed was unlike anything in the history of international law enforcement. For 6 months, Grace worked directly with the woman who had tried to murder her, using Diana's intimate knowledge of criminal networks to dismantle trafficking operations across West and Central Africa. The partnership was surreal and often tense. Diana's insights into criminal psychology were invaluable, but her casual discussion of murder and exploitation made Grace's skin crawl. They worked from a secure facility in Switzerland, with Diana under constant guard but treated as a cooperating witness rather than a prisoner. The Cotonou operation has a medical component, Diana explained during one briefing, pointing to satellite images of a compound in Benin. They're harvesting organs from victims before trafficking the survivors. You'll need a medical team ready for emergency surgery. Grace studied the intelligence with growing horror. How many victims? Probably 60 to 80 at any given time. They rotate stock every 2 weeks, so timing is critical. The clinical way Diana discussed human beings as stock reminded Grace why she had been willing to risk everything to expose her. But it also provided insights that saved lives when the tactical teams raided the compound. They rescued 73 people from the Cotonou facility, including 12 children who required immediate medical attention for surgical procedures performed without anesthesia or proper sterilization. Grace worked alongside the medical team for 18 hours straight, using her nursing skills to stabilize victims while investigators gathered evidence. You were right about the medical component, Grace told Diana during their debriefing. Without advance warning, we would have lost at least 6 of those children. Diana nodded without emotion. The next target is more complicated. Lagos Harbor cargo container operation. They're moving people through shipping manifests, disguised as agricultural exports. The Lagos operation was personal for Grace, taking place in the city where her nightmare with Diana had begun. But this time, she was the one calling the shots, leading a joint task force of Nigerian and international agents. The raid uncovered not just the trafficking operation, but a massive document forgery enterprise that had been providing false identities to criminals across the region. The evidence seized would lead to arrests in 12 countries and the closure of networks that had operated for decades. But it was during the Lagos operation that Grace discovered the true scope of what Diana was doing. Hidden in the shipping containers alongside the trafficking victims were detailed financial records showing how Diana's former network had been financing terrorist organizations across the Sahel region. The intelligence Diana was providing wasn't just about trafficking, it was about dismantling the entire infrastructure of organized crime in West Africa. You've been using me, Grace confronted Diana after the discovery. This isn't about redemption. This is about eliminating your competition and destroying evidence of your own involvement in terrorism financing. Diana's response surprised her. Both things can be true, Grace. Yes, I'm protecting myself by destroying evidence of my past activities. But I'm also genuinely helping you save lives and dismantle networks that are worse than anything I ever created. How do I know the difference? Because you're smart enough to verify everything I tell you, Diana replied. Because you don't trust me, which means you're checking my intelligence against independent sources. Because you're using me, just as much as I'm using you. Grace realized Diana was right. The partnership was working because neither of them trusted the other, which meant both were being careful to provide value while protecting their own interests. Over the following months, their joint operations resulted in the rescue of over 400 trafficking victims, the arrest of 67 network operators, and the seizure of assets worth more than $200 million. But each success brought them closer to the moment when Diana would have to fulfill her part of the bargain. Chapter 9. The Final Reckoning. The last operation took place in a remote facility in northern Chad, where intelligence indicated that Diana's former lieutenant was running a training camp for traffickers and terrorists. The compound was heavily defended and situated in territory controlled by various armed groups. This one is different, Diana warned Grace during their final planning session. Marcus Okafor, no relation, was my head of security for 5 years. He knows how I think, how I plan operations. He's expecting betrayal. Are you having second thoughts about testifying against him? No, Diana said without hesitation. Marcus crossed lines that even I wouldn't cross. He deserves whatever happens to him. But getting to him will require taking significant risks. The Chad operation was the most dangerous Grace had ever participated in. The tactical team included French Foreign Legion specialists and Chadian military units, all coordinating to assault a compound that intelligence suggested held over 100 victims and at least 30 armed defenders. Grace's role was to provide real-time intelligence from Diana during the assault, using secure communications to relay tactical information as the situation developed. 3 snipers on the eastern tower. Diana's voice crackled through Grace's earpiece as the assault began. Marcus always positions his best shooters there, and watch for the underground tunnels. He has escape routes built into every facility. The battle lasted 4 hours and resulted in the rescue of 127 trafficking victims, including 43 children who had been held for training as soldiers and smugglers. Marcus Okafor was captured alive, along with detailed records of his operations spanning 7 countries. But as Grace worked with medical teams to stabilize the rescued victims, she received an encrypted message that made her blood run cold. Congratulations on your success. Unfortunately, Diana Okafor will not be available to testify as promised. She suffered a tragic accident during transport to the detention facility. These things happen in such dangerous work. A friend. Grace rushed back to the communications center, demanding to speak with Diana's handlers. The response confirmed her worst fears. Diana's convoy had been attacked while moving between safe houses. There were no survivors. Grace stared at the intelligence files Diana had provided, realizing that the woman who had tried to kill her, then saved hundreds of lives through their partnership, was now dead herself, possibly eliminated by the very networks they had been dismantling. But as Grace processed the implications of Diana's death, she discovered something that changed everything. Hidden in the final intelligence package Diana had provided was a personal message addressed to Grace, along with detailed information about bank accounts containing over $50 million. Grace, the message read, "If you're reading this, it means my former associates have finally caught up with me. I always knew this partnership would probably end with my death, but I wanted to ensure that our work could continue even without my direct involvement. The money in these accounts represents profits from my criminal activities. I'm transferring ownership to you with the stipulation that it be used to fund anti-trafficking operations and victim support services. Consider it my final payment for the destruction you brought to my empire. You asked me once if I regretted trying to kill you. The honest answer is that I regret failing to recognize what you were, not a liability to be eliminated, but a force for justice that I should have supported from the beginning. You saved my soul, Grace Adebayo, even though you couldn't save my life. Use that money to save others. Diana." Epilogue. Legacy of Justice. 5 years after Diana Okafor's death, Grace stood before the United Nations Human Rights Council, delivering her annual report on trafficking operations in West Africa. Behind her, a presentation showed the dramatic decline in organized trafficking networks across the region. The Adebayo Foundation, she announced, has now assisted in the rescue of over 2,000 trafficking victims and the prosecution of 847 network operators. Our medical support programs have provided healthcare to thousands of survivors, while our educational initiatives have given people alternatives to exploitation. In the audience, representatives from dozens of countries listened, as Grace described how the foundation had transformed Diana's blood money into a force for healing and justice. After the presentation, Grace was approached by a young journalist from Lagos who wanted to know about the foundation's origins. The initial funding came from an unexpected source, Grace explained carefully, someone who had participated in the very activities we now fight against, but who chose redemption over continued criminality. "Do you think people can truly change?" the journalist asked. Grace considered the question while looking out at Lake Geneva, where she had first met with Diana to plan their unlikely partnership. "I think people can choose to become better than they were," Grace replied. "I think they can use their knowledge of darkness to create light. And I think sometimes the greatest advocates for justice are those who have seen the worst of what injustice can do." That evening, Grace returned to her hotel room and opened the secure laptop that contained her most private files. Among them was a folder labeled Diana, containing not just the operational intelligence from their partnership, but personal messages Diana had sent during their months of collaboration. The final message, sent just hours before Diana's death, was simple. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to choose a different ending to your story. Grace closed the laptop and looked out at the lights of Geneva, thinking about the strange journey that had brought her from a kitchen worker, terrified for her life, to an international advocate for human rights. Diana had been right about one thing. The choices people make in moments of crisis define not just their own destinies, but the destinies of everyone their actions touch. The woman who had tried to murder Grace had ended up saving more lives through their partnership than she had destroyed through years of criminal activity. It was a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, redemption remained possible for those with the courage to choose it. Grace's phone buzzed with a message from her security detail. All clear for tomorrow's travel to Nigeria. Looking forward to seeing the new shelter facility. Tomorrow, Grace would return to Lagos for the opening of the 15th shelter, funded by the Adebayo Foundation. The building would provide temporary housing, medical care, and education for trafficking survivors, services that existed because a kitchen worker had refused to stay silent about the crimes she witnessed. But tonight, Grace allowed herself a moment to grieve for Diana Okafor, the brilliant, damaged woman who had spent years as Grace's enemy before becoming her most valuable ally in the fight against the networks that had consumed her own life. The kitchen worker who had discovered her boss's murder plot had become the leader of the most successful anti-trafficking organization in Africa. And the billionaire who had planned that murder had ultimately funded the very justice she had tried to prevent. It was a story that would never make the news in its full complexity, but it was a story that had changed the fate of thousands of people across West Africa. Sometimes, Grace reflected, the most important victories happen in the shadows, fought by unlikely allies who discover that their shared humanity is stronger than their mutual hatred. As Grace prepared for bed in her Geneva hotel room, surrounded by the discreet security measures that still protected her from Diana's remaining enemies, she thought about the nursing textbooks she had once studied in Diana's mansion kitchen. She had dreamed then of healing individual patients, of using medical knowledge to ease suffering one person at a time. Instead, she had become a different kind of healer, using investigative skills and Diana's blood money to treat the systemic diseases that created trafficking victims in the first place. It wasn't the future she had planned, but it was the future her choices had created. And it was a future where justice was possible, even for those who had lost hope of ever finding it. The kitchen worker who had refused to stay silent had become the voice for those who had been silenced. And that voice would continue to speak truth to power, long after the echoes of gunfire in a Lagos mansion had faded into memory.